everybody. Welcome back to another week of Cherry Bomb. I'm Dalila Ali Raja.
Gloria.
I'm Tatum. I'm Bethany Landing.
We are missing Nikki this week, but we are still going to dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly of queer representation in storytelling and how it's kind of affected all of us in different ways, how it affected our coming out processes, how does it show up for us in our lives now? Like, are we still like yearning for those kind of stories or yearning for different kinds of stories? Like, what's the deal? Like, for you guys, what's the first memory you guys have of sapphic things in the media, storytelling? Sapphic-ness.
It's less shouldery than yours, I guess. This seems like very shoulder. When we first came out, I came out at 25, like just literally like the day I turned 25, I was like, I'm out. And a very good friend of ours, Dee and I, her name was Lava, and she gave us basically a lesbian film festival, if you will. So we spent, I think, like a whole weekend just.
And we were so excited about it too. Like we were like hyped up about it, anticipating. We got everything ready and our popcorn and sat up in my living room. And
then all the movies were sad, guys, and everybody was like dying or jumping off something, or everything was super tragic. And I just remember being like, oh no, this is not going to be a good life.
Yes, I was like, we just looked at each other, and me and Gloria were like, where the fuck is our Love Jones? Like, what is this shit that like everybody's jumping off a building or being chased down or going over a cliff or outlaws?
Yes. None of it ended well.
They were? Do you remember? Were they short films? Were they?
No, they were long films, actually. They were full-length films. There was like 3 of them. I can't remember was it Lost and Delirious? Was that the one where she jumps? Well, spoiler.
No, we'll have to look and link them, because now looking back at them, I don't feel the same way. I think it was just because we'd just come out and that was the only thing that we saw or had at the time that made it feel.
I still don't want to see people jumping off of buildings to this day. To this day, I would not have voluntarily chose to be watching the ones where somebody finally gets some pussy and then they jump off a building.
They were doing that. They were doing that because of the storyline being that they were gay. They came out and then they jumped off a building.
Well, they were in love with somebody, and I think one of them was either unrequited or somebody broke up with them, or it was like
it's all tragic.
It
was all tragic.
Yeah, queer tragedy porn. I'm not here for it.
Yeah.
That actually reminds me. I thought I remembered my first queer content on TV, and I think I remember getting channels that I shouldn't have been getting, like on a black and white TV. And it was if it wasn't like Girls Gone Wild, it was something of that ilk. But actually, it was a Sunday afternoon. I was quite young, and I started watching Children's Hour, which is a film from the 60s. Have you seen it?
I haven't watched. It's brutal. I haven't watched the whole thing because I saw where it was going. But yeah.
And that was my first. So actually, that would have affected me much more at a young age. It's all unspoken. But basically this woman kills herself. Spoilers. I guess we have to do mass spoiler alerts. Everybody dies. Kills herself because she is at the beginning falsely accused. But then she says, actually, it's true. It never did anything, but they're not wrong. But the final scene of the film is this it's like there was the nod to the establishment. Get rid of the lesbian, right? Lesbian dead, lesbian power, corralled and put away. But her friend shows up to her funeral and holds her head up high. So it was kind of like the nod to us that maybe it is okay. But like films at that time really had to straddle that line of like, what could they give you? What little tiny glimmer of a hero or a heroine could you find, and how much could you hang on to that before it was taken away? So yeah, I could have been 11 or 12 when I saw that.
Yeah. Oh wow, that would have done me in.
Traumatizing.
Bethany, what about you?
Well, I was doing a little research on this, trying to remember sort of how far back I, had seen sort of my first really lesbian kiss. And I came up with Wild Things, but, and I just remember going, oh my gosh, this is like, it's so sad. I felt so like kind of dirty that I was seeing it. I was like, oh my God, what is happening? But I don't think I really turned away. So that's what I was thinking. But then I also remember thinking at the time, like, why isn't there more of this? Because this is okay. And I don't know why I thought that, because I didn't have there was no one I knew I didn't know anyone at the time that was gay. I didn't know anyone, I knew nothing about any of that. And, but I remember going, well, gosh darn it, there should be more of this out there. Anybody could do whatever they want. Whoever should just love anybody. And that's what I remember thinking at the time in my little Midwestern brain.
Yeah. I feel like it was The Color Purple for me. The first kiss that I saw was The Color Purple. It was Miss Seeley and Suge Avery.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I mean, I remember reading that book, and I was way too young to be reading that book. But my mom and all of her friends had read it, and then she was done with it, and it was just sitting around, and I snuck it up to my room, and I read it, and I just remember reading that being like, oh my God, what's happening in here? What's happening in this book? But yeah, I guess that may have been the first one for me too.
Mm-hmm.
Color Purple.
It's so interesting. Like, and then you see like how things have like somewhat shifted, but not completely either. Like we finally started getting more and more characters, but it's almost like the people who greenlight stuff are like who have like these undercurrent ideas wanted people to like, I think, not feel as safe to be out. Like it's like a cautionary tale. It's like, I think you showing up, it's like, you can do this, but it's not going to be accepted and you may die, or you're going to have to go on the run.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I didn't watch season 6 of The L Word because I felt like that's what they turned this incredible, advancement into. But then the tale of Jenny Schechter is she comes to LA and she's straight, she meets lesbians, and then she dies. That is a shit fucking tale that we've heard before. Like, it was the
most terrible season. If season 5 of that series was so good, the one that Angela Robinson did, but it was brilliant. And then season 6, I was like, what are they doing? We could have can we just get a do-over? Can we get a do-over this whole season?
But even the L Word in and of itself, right? So when that came out, I was living in Brooklyn, and we'd never had that, right? So that was the first time where there was on like kind of mainstream television, not mainstream like, the networks, but other television where you can tune in each week and see like lesbians in their natural atmosphere or whatever. I remember feeling like, ooh, because we hadn't had that representation before, it felt so precious to me. And I wanted it to be better than it was at the time, because I just felt like this is our one shot. We can't be over sexualized, but we can't be under sexualized. We can't be this too much, and we can't be that. Like it was just like such a fine line, because when you only have one, it becomes like the pinnacle, the representation. And so that shit was so worrisome to me. I was doing too much worrying to enjoy it the first time around.
That's interesting. I mean, obviously for Delilah, Tatum and I, that's how we met Delilah, was watching, going out in LA and watching the L Word. And that's how we sort of all met each other out here. Well, Tatum and I were already roommates, but we'd known each other for years before that. But the L Word was such I feel like it was a golden era of LA for us, for sure. There was so much, so much fun, and so much like just going out and meeting, and yet drama, so much drama. There was so much drama in our own lives. We felt like we could have been part of the like storylines at any point, and I think that that's also what led to the spinoff of the reality show, is the fact that I think everybody that was out in the world experiencing the L Word showings felt like, I think this could actually be made into a reality show, and then someone did it.
Yeah, and I think that that's very true. Like for one, the golden hour for us and like building our friendships, there's like some of, you know, dear friends that I met and built community around those L Word screenings. But also it's so funny because I talk to people in other states, like you, Glow, because you were in New York, or like friends who lived other places, like Kiana in Detroit, and they're like, this shit's not real. I said, actually, I watched something like that happen literally last week at the place where we were watching that real, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was like all this stuff actually, yes, lesbians do look like that in LA sometimes. And yes, actually those things kind of do happen. And yeah, those two club owners are based on real people.
Yeah.
And they are really that problematic in moments. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. I think having the difference of like that community aspect of it for us, I think colored the experience of the L Word so much for us, because it was a part of like our life and our connection and our way of finding each other and finding community here.
Yeah. And do you remember when we did that contest at
yes.
me and Dalila were acting on stage a scene from the L Word, getting judged by the actors from the L Words.
I was Rona.
I was like, I might be at peak lesbian. This might be it. Like,
yeah, we did. Were you Jenny? I was Marina. Were you Jenny?
I was not Jenny. I was Alice.
Alice. Okay.
Loved Alice.
Yeah, it was so much fun. As a matter of fact, if anybody actually who's watching owns the box set, it's in the extras on, I think, season 3. They actually put the contest on there.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow. I just remember Kate Mona gave us a 9.5. So that's, yeah.
Oh,
so
you could
highlight.
Yeah, we were like, we didn't win. We were the first runners up, I think. We were like second place, I think, in the competition for it.
Yeah. So it was, but I think like as much as that brought me in, I remember watching Go Fish. Mm-hmm. Did you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
That took me back out. Like that actually made me go, ooh, this might not be for me. Like kind of that was the equivalent of like the sad thing. I was like, I don't know. I couldn't see myself. And I don't know. I was just like, oh, it's just, I felt like the moral of the story is don't go out with attractive people. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm just too superficial to be a lesbian. So I was like, maybe I need to rethink that. And I think it actually set me back a couple of years.
I think that was one of the ones we watched on that first night too. And I don't think I wish we had seen like Watermelon Woman in that beginning set of movies, which we didn't, because there's very few, besides not having that much queer representation, there really wasn't much Black queer representation. So I didn't see myself in almost anything, you know what I mean? Yeah. And especially since back in the day, I also was poly. It was also things like She Hate Me, Spike Lee's movie, which everybody has like a lot of problems with it. But for me, it was one of the first times that I saw some representation of like anything poly with brown people in it, like even something around that thing. And so I really appreciated it and liked it just because it's the same thing. It's like the only thing out there that even has a little bit of something that deals with something that reflects my life.
Mm-hmm. You know, I also think about the idea of like, you know, so recently Niecy Nash came out like with her, you know, with her wife, and it was just like one big foul swoop. It was like, you didn't know she had a wife. And the next thing you know, there's like, I have a wife. Here's the pictures. We look great. We happy. And it was like, boom. And it was out there. And I thought, gosh, we don't get to see that very much. You know what I mean? Like we get to see a little bit more now because like of Instagram and like posts and like things like, you know, Black queer joy and things like that. You get to see that. But that was, I needed that back in the day, whether it was like through a movie or whether it was through like seeing something online or people in real life, like just knowing like that happy ending, whatever that is like something that's possible. Like I knew like I'd grown up with like Black families and grown up with like Black couples who were together their whole lives and that were happy and married and things like that. But I hadn't seen that in like queerness or Black queerness either. And so I get really excited when people see that, not just for myself, but just for people coming up, like, hey, look, like we could be cute and wear rainbow shoes and get married or whatever we want.
In our chats.
Don't you guys think, I don't have too much interaction with, young teenagers or, whatever these days. But I hope that it's all different for them, now, in the fact that I just want it to be so part of society, part of every show, part of anything, that it's just a storyline and it's not a thing. But I don't know if it is or not. I mean, you interact with them more, that age group now.
Yeah, I do. And it's interesting because there is more of it, but there's still not enough of it, and it's not normalized enough that it doesn't feel like a thing when it happens. Like, they get super excited when there's queer characters or gender nonconforming characters in shows, just as much as we wanted representation, because that's what their friends actually are and look like. It's like that generation has much more openness about queerness and all of those things, and the whole alphabet soup of our community. So it's interesting, like, out of my kids' friends, a lot of them were queer. Like, it's like, for somebody, it was I think it's something, they did a survey, and it was something like, it's more than 50%. It's like well over 50% of people in Phoenix's generation identify as gender nonconforming or a part of the LGBTQIA family.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and when people are straight, they're like, I'm just kind of boring and I'm straight. Like, there's like, they like almost apologize for being straight, which is really funny. But Phoenix had like, like when Phoenix was coming out as trans, like there were friends who were like, oh, that's so awesome. I'm just like cisgendered and straight. Like, it's so great that you have, like, it's like an exciting thing for them. But it's like the gatekeepers on the shows and stuff are just catching up to that being a thing. So whenever there's lesbian characters or trans characters, they get super excited and really support those shows and are really happy about those people getting together. They do a lot of what they call shipping. So like, and it's like a whole culture around like putting characters together or wanting them to get together. Like, the canon ship is like the one that you can see the storytellers are trying to get those people together, but then they make up their own ships and their own queer ships between people. And they have a whole thing online about it, fan fiction they write. It's really interesting. They're like, if you don't have the representation for us, we're going to write it and find a way to do it and put it online.
Yeah. So like there's, One Day at a Time, right? So that show, and I just kind of fell upon it a couple, maybe like a year and a half ago or something. And the daughter on there is queer, Latinx. And I was so shocked that just on this show, that was just like you're just putting the show out there. Nobody's saying like, this is a super queer show. And they're just letting this child have her life. And then with her quinceañera, she got to wear this suit, and it was like the whole thing. And I just remember like watching this and crying, like, I'm not, Latinx and a teenager, but just seeing that was possible was so exciting for me watching it. And the show was just so like incredible, the way that they've handled like, it not being like, of course they had the moments with the parents, because parents may have moments about it, but it wasn't like the end of that girl's life. It wasn't, and her person that she was dating, was gender non-conforming. And I was just like, what they're doing with this television show that was like an old show that they remade and made better to fit the times that we're in now. It's amazing.
I think that's happening a lot more too. I think I've heard about One Day at a Time, but I haven't watched it yet. But I've heard there's a lot of shows that are kind of reimagining and making sure to try and be more inclusive of things. And these kids, this is the other thing, these kids will fight. Like, Generation Z ain't playing with nobody. They write letters, they emails, and they tweet. They will put stuff out there and fight against it. I think my child's in there right now arguing with some cis white men about trans issues, literally on the line right now. It's what they do.
Yeah. And even like the show Never Have I Ever on Netflix.
Oh, yeah. I haven't watched that one, but I've seen it. Like, it looks really interesting because it's based around a South Asian character, right?
Yeah. So that in and of itself, it's like, oh, let's put more, just like what you were saying, Bethany, just more of all of it. Let's just put more of all of it. And, there's no reason why I should be like, I love this show, but I loved that show. Loved it. And I was like, another queer character on there. And it's just like, it normalizes it. And I think that's
Yes.
a healthy way for even people who aren't, teenagers or whatever to be watching. Just people living their lives.
Yeah, the half of it is really good too. I love teen shows and things. So the half of it's like a movie, but it's by the same woman who did Saving Face. And it's really, really awesome around kind of like just telling a story too. It's not even a coming out story. It's like just telling a slice of life of this person's life, which I think is the thing. Like somebody earlier was talking about like coming out stories. Do you think that people are completely over them, or do you think that there's still a place for that in the market?
There is, I think that, I mean, my personal thing was it took me so fucking long to come out that I bored myself. And so I find it really hard watching coming out stories. Like I had to admit that like Kissing Jessica Stein, like loads of people rolled their eyes and was like, oh my God, I would
I loved it.
not have sex with her. I was really quite bad. I was humming and hawing and, took a long time to get me into bed. And thank you, Angela. Putting in the work.
I'm going to tell her you do the shout out. She gets a shout out.
I find that I don't necessarily seek those shows. I feel now that like I find myself not seeking content, but when it does sort of like land, there's been things that I didn't know I needed. Like, did you see Gentleman Jack?
Oh God, yes. I love Miss Ann Lister's story anyway, and I've watched every iteration that has ever been released about her story. She is such a fucking badass. Oh God, Gentleman Jack is brilliant. Brilliant. I actually watched each episode, I think at least 2 or 3 times every week.
I just started watching it because Tatum told me about it a while ago, but I had so many things on my list. So,
And it's based on this real woman who was just a badass and just was like living her life with all her money and her things, and got together with another woman with her money and just kept doing their things in the 1700s.
What is this?
Gentleman Jack?
It's a period costume drama based on a real story of a real woman who actually her diaries were written in code. They're one of the 3rd largest diary collections in the world. I mean, she noted down everything. And after her death, her family decoded some of them and went, oh, fuck. I mean, she wrote down how often she masturbated, what she did in bed, how many women she had sex with. I mean, there's an incredible catalog that's all in code. And so they started decoding it and turned like a part of it into their series. And at the time of this particular one that was just released on BBC, she's in her 40s. And, she's already had like many dalliances. She's kind of in her skin. She knows what she wants. And there was something about seeing a woman very sexy in her 40s owning it. And also I think there's that thing of when we think back to women in the past, we often imagine them being oppressed and disempowered, and even our image of our history like that, I think sometimes can narrow our sense of possibility. And I do think we need to go back and reclaim a lot of badass women that actually made incredible achievements in their time, and that we have been doing that for a long time. And
I think the whole thing with her family too, that they didn't stop her, was the other thing. So like I think most of these stories, people assume anybody who's acting that way is going to be ostracized by everybody and all this stuff, and it just wasn't the case. Her parents didn't raise her, her aunt and uncle did, and they just let her just be who the fuck she was. And it's Phoebe Waller-Bridge who created that show. She does Fleabag and all that stuff too. She's brilliant, but 2, she got this grant that allowed her to then have, because she basically was so excited about it, she started wanting to do this in like 2012. So she went and got like part of a book that had already translated part of the diaries, and the diaries are a part of a library. So, and she grew up in the town where Ann Lister lived. So she went and started decoding it herself. And now she got a grant, and she had all the pages scanned in so that anybody who wants to start decoding them can decode more of her stories, because they did part of it for the show and part of it for like these other things that have happened. But there's thousands of pages that have never been translated that people don't know the stories yet that are in them.
It also reminds me of Wild Nights with Emily. Have you seen that?
I haven't. Jackie. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like retelling the story, but making sure that we know that she was queer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's like we didn't know, and they're like, no, this was a queer woman, and it's funny and it's hysterical. You know, it's like very funny, but it's also just like I like the idea of just like not pulling people out of the closet, but just making sure that all of whoever we were and wherever we were, that our whole selves were a part of it. Not just like Emily Dickinson's such a great writer. Emily Dickinson was a queer ass great writer. Like I feel like having that context is important. Just I don't want to lose that history of like who people were.
That's actually the kind of stuff that I would wish they would continue to start developing, is like reclaiming queerness out of history, like Eleanor Roosevelt and all these like people that you miss, Zora Neale Hurston. Like, I mean, we know about Langston Hughes, but actually showing that part of their stories, so that people get a whole picture of how we always been here. We always gonna be here. We've always done really badass stuff, I think, because a part of the thing, I think, with having who you love be outside of society's whatever quote unquote accepted norms means that something very fundamental you have to like kind of fight for and fight through. And by the time you do that, everything else feels like some bullshit. So I think that that's why we're activists and why we have artists that think so out of the box. And there's so many of them that are queer, and being able to see ourselves in those spaces and looking like that, I think gives more people permission to kind of live their life out loud.
Yeah.
That really mirrors what you're saying, Tatum, too, about just sort of reclaiming history and pointing out the stuff that should have been, you know, celebrated about, you know, these people's lives that was just sort of hidden or you know, in the closet. That's why that must be where that came from, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I mean, I think she hid her diaries in a wall, but yeah, I mean, they were, you know, and I just imagine sort of generations of her family going, oh, what's all this? And taking it out, going, yeah, it goes back in the wall. for like hundreds of years, like 150 years or something. Like they're all mortified, but then put it back in.
And the thing is, the community there is the house that she lived in, her manor, is like a historical site that they make the children go on tours through every year. And until like 5 years ago, that she was queer was not. That's when they first started adding that to the tour, and it's been, you know, so long, and they just left it out.
And now it's a lesbian mecca.
It is.
And
I mean,
yeah.
Now that I know, that sounds like my first trip after COVID.
Oh, wow. It's a really beautiful part of the country as well. And nearby is where the church where they say the first lesbian wedding happened.
Oh. Was it hers?
That's their
the first one to get married? I know that she married her partner, but did a ceremony.
Well, that's what they're claiming is the location. So it's like it's on the tour, you know. So yeah, but I think it is, you know, it's lovely to see that, and it seems that lesbians of all ages are like, must go to Halifax now, like, you know, which really shows the power of that.
Yeah,
and how it can really change like our perceptions of ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, you look like you had a question, but
No, I was just thinking about that Ryan Murphy movie, that Hollywood movie that was on Netflix, and you know, a lot of people weren't really into it. But what I loved about it is just the retelling in a way that you wish things had been.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of like, wouldn't it have been nice if people had been able to be out in Hollywood? Wouldn't it have been nice if you know, Black people had had agency? Wouldn't it have been nice if women had had agency? And so because I was, at the end of it, I was crying, and I was like, why are you crying at the end of this movie? Is this a COVID cry, or is this just like a regular, like you're crying because of the movie? And it was the movie, because I just thought like, how lovely to kind of like fix that, even for the 90 minutes that we were watching, you know?
I think that stuff like that is really healing. Like being able to see stories, even though we know that that's not how it happened. You know what I'm saying? Like Avatar, we know that the native peoples didn't get a chance to rise up and the earth and the trees didn't start killing the colonizers. However, it's very satisfying to watch the trees rise up and kill the colonizers in that whole part of the film. And I think it's a healing thing to be able to see, even in our imagination, some of it be set to right.
Yeah. And it makes me also think differently about like my art. Like I don't have to write the story that's been written or the way that it's been written. Like I can write an alt ending that feels better. So that movie was helpful for me.
And I mean, you know, we all grew up during that time of like the feminist backlash of the 80s, where, you know, any woman that had any kind of sexual agency, let alone any kind of queerness signified, was either murdered or a murderer, you know. And you think of like the films that came one after the other, and like you look at one by itself and you're like, okay, that's a thriller. But then you think, okay, well, Basic Instinct, you know, you know, a single white female, like one
you gotta have it, like all those, like if you have agency, you have to get raped or you have to get killed or you have to.
And we were really like, you know, like that was going into our psyches at that time. And like, how different would it have been to have seen women be sexual and not murdered or
and not murdered.
You know, I used to read all those like Judith Krantz and Sidney Sheldon books, right? When I, again, way too young. Like I was reading them at probably like 11 or 12, which is ridiculous. However, that's what was happening. And they had actually characters who were queer in them. They weren't like as fully realized as some of them, but they definitely had queer women in them. The women were very kind of sexually independent, and they didn't get punished for it. Like in all of those books, like, and in even like Jackie Collins' books, like the Lucky Santangelo novels, like those women had agency and they had a rough time in like their childhood and their beginning things. And then they always became badasses that were like running everything by the end. And I think it made a huge difference for me to have that kind of story fed into me before I got to like seeing movies where I'm watching all of that happen, because even though like I experienced in real life, like me being viewed as promiscuous or enjoying sex or liking that, I got judged a lot from people at the time when I was in college about that. But that I had the ability to access that in myself, I think came because of the stories that I was reading where I saw somebody overcame it and became powerful and empowered by the end of the story.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's always been a really big thing for me. So we're talking about the representation, but also just that openness to be able to be yourself, no matter who you are, no matter what your, you know, whatever alphabet soup piece that you are. I just think that representation in media is so important because it just gets in your brain, right? Whether it's good, it's bad, or ugly. It all just gets in there and it affects you, and it can do like Tatum, take you backwards 2 years, or it can lift you up and say, you know what, this is empowering, and I can come out, I can do whatever I want to do, I can be whoever I want to be. And I really hope that you know, Delilah's beautiful kid and that whole generation has that experience. That's my hope, you know. I mean, we've already had our growing up and, you know, in our teenage years. So I just hope everybody else's gets to be, you know, so inclusive.
Yeah. What do you think our takeaways are? Oh, sorry, Glo, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the same thing.
Oh, look at that. What are the takeaways?
I think I just said, yeah, I think Bethany just.
What's your takeaway?
The good, the bad, the ugly. I think mine is just being able to change the narrative. Just like the way that it has been doesn't have to always be that way.
Yeah.
In freedom and in life, yeah.
I think one of my takeaways, I was reminded as we were talking about like 3 or 4 different stories I've been wanting to write. So it's like maybe getting to it and like kind of pulling some of those together, because I think writing ourselves back into our history is so important. And maybe digging into that a little bit more. Like, I think I maybe want to, like, my takeaways from myself to start digging. Yeah. What about you, T?
Yeah, I mean, I like that because I think there are narratives that own us and there's narratives that we own and are empowered by. And I think, you know, we've gone through times where we've sort of survived being battled by, you know, not great representation and not great messages, really, you know, sometimes really blatantly obvious and sometimes subliminal. But yeah, like, and even if we are not, we don't think of ourselves as creative, or we don't think of ourselves as a writer, I think there's a way that like we can, yeah, kind of think of like what our narratives are, like what are the films that we want to pull together and go, yeah, that's the one, like that makes me feel like I'm owning it, I'm creating it.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
We put a list at the end of things that we feel good about.
Yeah, there's so many links we need to put to movies that we liked and or maybe didn't.
All right. Well,
Cheers, family. I love y'all.
Cheers.
Cheers.